Welcome back all. So this video we're going to talk about specific neurotransmitters. So last video then I talked about what are neurotransmitters in general and how they kind of work. And this time we're going to talk about some specialized neurotransmitters. And yes, you will need to know their names and information about them for the midterm exam. So to start off with, we're going to talk about the specialized neurotransmitters. Why do we have so many different types of neurotransmitters? And the main reason is so that we don't have crosstalk between different areas of the brain. In other words, it allows multiple parts of the brain to communicate at the same time, and you don't get this crossover effect. And in order to help this, then different brain systems are actually sensitive to different neurotransmitters as well. So we see this chemical specificity across the brain and the nervous system in general. Now there is a really great YouTube video that helps explain this, so I would highly recommend you watch this video, even if you just do it for some review, if you're looking at this before the midterm. Or if something I'm explaining doesn't quite make sense to you, this is a great video for you. So the first specific neurotransmitter we're going to talk about is glutamate. And this is one of the big two neurotransmitters. There's two main neurotransmitters throughout the brain, and these are the two that you're definitely going to want to know. I'm going to bring them up throughout the class. And they're definitely going to be on the midterm and the final, and maybe even your assignments. You're going to read about them. So these are the two main neurotransmitters. If you're going to remember any two after this class, remember glutamate, and then the next one I'm going to talk about GABA. So glutamate its other name is glutamic acid. And the main thing you want to remember about glutamate is that it is excitatory. So it's an excitatory neurotransmitter, which means it increases the possibility of an action potential in the postsynaptic cell. Now, glutamate is expressed in the whole brain. So again, it's one of the big two neurotransmitters. It's expressed in almost every single part of the nervous system, especially in the brain. And it's thought to help in the control of behaviors, especially learning and memory. You're going to see it when we talk about these areas later in the term. We're going to talk about glutamate and its role in learning and memory especially. Now the second main neurotransmitter you're going to need to know is GABA. So it's gamma aminobutyric acid. It's a mouthful. I clearly don't say it right all the time, so we just call it GABA. Now, the main thing with GABA is that it's inhibitory. So you can see how it's like the opposite of glutamate. So again, because it's inhibitory, then it decreases the probability of the postsynaptic cell firing. Now, again, like glutamate, it is expressed in the whole brain and other parts of the nervous system as well. And it also plays a role in the control of behaviors. But the behaviors it has a bigger role in would be anxiety and motor control behaviors. And so that's really because a lot of cells that are involved in motor control, or muscles or cells involved in managing anxiety, then the main neurons of these parts of the brain that control this are constantly firing. And what GABA does is it tells these areas to stop firing. So it really helps control that balance. You will see some deficits of GABA or some, differing effects of GABA, especially in Huntington's disease. You do see that there's there's different levels of GABA from normal healthy patients than in patients suffering from Huntington's disease. Also, alcohol actually stimulates the activity of GABA, which shows depressed neural activity. So that's why alcohol inhibits clear thinking, some emotional control, and motor coordination, because we no longer have the positive effects of GABA going on. Because we have too much GABA going on. We have too much inhibitory going on because alcohol stimulates GABA. It makes sure that we have extra GABA. Now, another major neurotransmitter is acetylcholine. So, acetylcholine is an excitatory neurotransmitter, and acetylcholine functions at the synapses involved in muscle movement and in memory. So you can see how it's an excitatory neurotransmitter that's involved in muscle movement, whereas GABA was inhibitory and worked with motor control. But like glutamate that had a role in memory, acetylcholine also has a role in memory. So you can have multiple excitatory neurotransmitters in the same brain areas doing the same job. So that's what we see here. We do see some memory loss in Alzheimer's disease due to a decrease in acetylcholine. So because we don't have enough acetylcholine, then we're not properly able to recall memories. So that's one area where you'll see some deficits in acetylcholine and its function in other parts of the medical field. The next neurotransmitter we're going to talk about is norepinephrine. So norepinephrine is both excitatory and inhibitory. It can kind of do both. It really just does whatever's needed, and it functions at many various sites in the brain. So a lot of it's one of those neurotransmitters that's a little less understood because it does have so many different functions, but it is involved in learning, memory, wakefulness, and eating. And then we also see some changes in norepinephrine levels in patients diagnosed with depression and panic disorder. Sometimes, just as a side note, you might see norepinephrine referred to as noradrenaline. So norepinephrine and noradrenaline are the same thing. The next neurotransmitter that you're going to hear about a lot is going to be serotonin. So you've probably heard of serotonin before. And what serotonin is it's actually an inhibitory neurotransmitter. Even though it is involved in a lot of mood control and eating, sleep, that kind of thing. But without serotonin, then you see some depression. You see some differences in sleeping, in your different sleep cycles. You see the prevalence of eating disorders. When you usually have a lack of serotonin, then that's when you see these negative issues arise. And serotonin is found at multiple sites throughout the brain. So you don't need to remember any specific brain areas for that. Now you will see that I put it's inhibitory mostly. There are a couple sites where it's actually been found to be excitatory, but for this I really want you to focus on that serotonin is inhibitory. Next we have dopamine, again another neurotransmitter you might have heard of, and it is involved, you might have heard of it as like a happy drug. It is involved in pleasure. So when you're enjoying something, then you get a release of dopamine. But it does have multiple other functions as well, like voluntary movement and learning. And dopamine, like norepinephrine, is both excitatory and inhibitory. So it's going to change its function based on where it's interacting. So depending on where in the brain it's interacting, it's either going to be excitatory or inhibitory as needed. And again, we see some association with some disorders such as depression, Parkinson's disease, and schizophrenia. And in some of these, such as Parkinson's disease, we actually see an overexpression of dopamine, which leads to Parkinson's disease. So having too much dopamine can be a bad thing, but also having too little can also lead to a lack of pleasure, motivation, which we will see in some depressed patients. Now, the last neurotransmitter you're going to need to know is endorphin. So endorphins, again, I'm sure you've heard of these. And endorphin is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. And what it does is it causes an insensitivity to pain. So a lot of times you'll hear about someone maybe injured, but their endorphin, they won't notice, they might not feel the pain, and that's because they have too much endorphin running through their system. So it kind of blocks the pain sensitivity so that the body's able to react and get out of a harmful situation. So you do see that hypersensitivity to pain and some immune problems. You'll see if there's an undersupply of endorphins, then you will see the immune system start to go haywire. So those are the specific neurotransmitters I want you guys to know. Remember, the main two that are kind of in charge, large and in charge, are glutamate and GABA. And then we have these five other neurotransmitters that you will also need to know. So know whether they're excitatory, inhibitory, or both. And then know kind of what function they play. On Friday's class, then we're going to start to talk about how everything connects, and we'll start looking a little bit bigger.